if what you were to say is, I think that anybody who values the experience of an animal ought to be vegan. I'd say that is a good stance, right? That is a fine stance. I don't have a problem with that stance. I want to make the assertion, though, that anyone who cares about animals' experiences intrinsically ought to be vegan. What you're leaving there is an if condition, right? So it's if you care about the suffering of animals, you ought to be vegan. What that leaves it open to, and this is like the problem that I run into with a lot of vegans, right? Is I'll say, okay, well, I don't care about the experience of animals. Should I still be vegan? And the answer is almost always yes. Yes, you should still be vegan. So that makes it sound to me like that's not actually the argument. So I'm trying to get down to like the fundamental argument of it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not boiling down to a fundamental argument.
I'm gonna do this debate with this vegan guy really quickly. I'll be back. Yo, what's good, my dude?
Hello, yeah, I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing great now that you're here. What's up? Are you, So we got the debate going on or whatever? Discussion? Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, sure, yeah, fine.
Yeah, so from what I understand, you're a vegan, I think?
Yeah, correct.
I mean, that's kind of the position, that's probably the position I'd assume you'd take with the DebateAVegan tag on TikTok.
Yeah, I'm vegan.
I'm a massive detective, you can clearly tell. Yeah, I don't know, I scrolled through your page a bit. I think I haven't really around any notes because I'm an absolute, unprepared, fuckwit. So, I guess we could just kind of, like, free flow this off the top. Do you have the position that, like, a lot of people should be vegan?
Yeah, so the way
Right.
I define veganism is that everyone should strive to cause as little harm to animals as possible. So everyone should essentially eat as few animals as possible. If there are people that need to eat animals for their health, then I would still call those people vegan. So like in my world,
Mhm.
everyone should be vegan, if that makes sense.
Right, so I guess that differs for like the normal standard definition of veganism.
I
A
think
bit, yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I think that's pretty much the accepted definition of veganism,
Is it the
at least
accepted definition?
among vegans. That's the vegan
Right.
society which kind of kicked off veganism in the UK. That's the definition they use. I think they say as far as practical and as far as practical, yeah, something like that. As far as possible, basically.
Sure. All right, sure. So from my understanding of your argument, it was, what was it? It was like you should strive to cause, or it's wrong to harm animals when you don't need to. That'd be premise one.
Yeah.
Um, sorry, I'm writing down notes on a notepad. It's wrong to harm animals when you don't need to. Most people don't need to harm animals, therefore harming animals, to eat them is wrong. Is that the argument, basically?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So I guess I could test like the first premise of that argument. I don't think it's wrong to harm animals when you don't need to. Generally speaking, I think there's a lot of frameworks that can work to what would you call it? There's a lot of different frameworks within philosophy that would allow people to eat animals and still not, or still see it as like a morally, what would you say? A non-morally abhorrent action, I'd say. I think that's where I guess I differ from like a lot of vegans when it comes to the topic. I typically tend to agree that like a lot of what you call it, meat eaters tend to have like a large amount of cognitive dissonance when they're talking about like this type of subject. I think that oftentimes I'll run into this like this huge problem in the arguments of people. We're talking about like animal cruelty, where they'll be like, "Oh, I care about the suffering of animals, but I still think I think we should kill them as quickly as possible. I think we should still kill them, like for our own enjoyment, right?" I think that's a very weak position. I think I tend to agree with you on that. I think the only thing I disagree with is, typically speaking, I consider myself an egoist. So my argument would basically go, the first premise would be, I have an experience. I know I have an experience. This is like a very axiomatic thing. I know I'm experiencing something because I can experience it directly. I aim to maximize that experience as a value to me because, again, this is very axiomatic. I don't think working with animals would ever produce or maximize my experience, so I don't think that working with animals is intrinsically something I ought to do. Do you think you'd have like a problem with that stance, or?
I don't have a problem with it. I understand that
Right,
argument
yeah,
from the axioms. My issue is that
right.
I don't want to say what you're saying is not true because
Sure.
obviously you know and I don't. But I would but I've said I don't want to say it, but I'll say it. I don't think that's true. I think you do value the suffering of animals, even if you're telling me you don't.
Okay, so when you're making that claim, I generally tend to be like pretty emotionally disconnected person. A lot of my arguments don't tend to like come from like this place of empathy. I don't really have like I think the arguments that appeal to empathy tend to be very, very weak. Um I like the
Yeah.
arguments that I tend to go off of because it can be like, for example, if we're arguing like what do you call it? Social issues in the United States of America. You can be the most racist person on the planet. You can just absolutely hate black people. You can want an entire genocide, right? But you would still want to optimize the care for black people because you understand that it would optimize your own preferences. I think the one thing that we can axiomatically say for everybody is they value their own experience rather than valuing the experience of any other living creature. I do think there are 100% exceptions to that. I think that I would
Yeah.
fall under that. Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you operate under the fact that you can't know anyone else's experience. You can only know that you suffer.
Right. Yeah. I legitimately
I'm
could
guessing
not.
it's like based
I
on a social
legitimately
contract.
could never prove that anybody else has an experience. Right. It's like the philosophical zombie concept. The only
Yeah.
for experience that I can be 100% sure in is my own. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that because of that, you would invoke a social contract so that you don't want to harm another human because you don't want them to harm you.
Exactly. So whenever I typically think that whenever human beings come together, when I work with other human beings, that helps me to maximize my preferences. For example, if we're taking like let's say we have like 10 people, right? We have 10 people and we all want to like build a civilization. I think we could build a civilization that maximizes our preferences more than each one of us working like individually or working against each other. It's like the idea that rational men's preferences don't conflict or you know.
Yeah. So I mean, I am much more of a beginner in philosophy than you are by
Right.
the sounds of it, but I can grapple with the terms.
Hmm.
My issue really is
Sure.
I understand my arguments. I don't do my arguments from empathy either. I sort of try to
Mhm.
build my arguments up from the ground up as well. I just don't think that in our day-to-day lives we don't operate and choose our decisions and decide on morality based on the social contract. So
Um,
if say for example, if you were to be buying a t-shirt,
sure.
and you could buy one that was ethically produced, or you could buy one in a sweatshop, I don't
Right.
think, but not even 99%. It's like a very tiny amount of people will even be considering. I mean, a tiny amount of people have even heard of a social contract. Most people would just
Mhm.
say, I don't. I wouldn't want to be. I mean, it's essentially the social contract, but it's like I wouldn't want to be working in a
Sure.
sweatshop. So,
Right.
and I mean, we can do the same thing with animals. I think it's clear that animals suffer,
Hmm.
regardless of the fact that we can't know their state of mind. Um, I think you'd have to be a bit of an idiot to deny that animals suffer, personally.
Okay, so I think the problem is whenever you're talking about this, you're talking about me putting myself in another person's position. I don't think that's particularly what we're talking about when we're talking about egoism, at least in this sense. When I speak on egoism, I'm talking about the idea that I want to maximize my experience. That doesn't consider other people's experience, right? So the reason I murder, or I wouldn't murder somebody, is not because I don't want to be murdered. That's not what I'm trying to say. The reason I don't murder somebody is because I think it produces a less functional society. I think that it would obviously lead to a worse experience for me, right? I can be in prison for that. I could have people coming after me for that, trying to murder me as well. Um, I get put in a position where I can hinder my own preferences by doing this action. I don't think the same thing applies to animals. I think that you could oppress an animal for the longest possible time, and I don't think there'd ever be like a violent revolution of the animals where we all like die or some crazy shit like that. I don't think there's any situation in which an oppressing an animal would, what would you say, harm my preferences. I don't think that's a
Yeah,
thing.
so I mean, I think that's all true. I just don't think again, I just don't think in the real world this would apply to you at all. Even though I don't even know you slightly, I just take if I'm all right to ask you a question, just a
Sure,
hypothetical.
go for it. Yeah.
The drowning child, Peter Singer.
Can you explain it to me?
So, well, I won't. If you don't know the child, I'll just do. I'll just skip the child then. Say, for example, you walk in to work and you've just bought some new trainers.
Sure.
Say the trainers cost you, I don't know, $80.
Sure.
And there's a puddle and there's no bystanders and there's a drowning puppy in the puddle.
Sure.
You can go and save the puppy from drowning, but it's going to ruin your new trainers, or you can walk past it and go to work.
Right.
Are you saving the puppy or not?
I generally speaking, it depends. Like, if there's nobody else to see it, then no, I don't particularly care. No.
Okay, so now I mean, like I said before, I'm in a difficult position because I can't
So
deny
I
that. I can't
understand.
deny
No,
your
no,
state of
okay,
mind,
okay.
but
I get this.
I
I
definitely
get
believe
this.
that
I
you're
get where
saying
you're
this.
coming from. I get where you're coming from on this.
I
My
think you've said
positions.
that to remain consistent in the argument. That
My
like
positions.
there is no way you would leave that puppy to die.
No, no, you don't know me at that point. So generally speaking, I'm a very emotionally disconnected person. I don't really feel an intrinsic connection to other people. Fucking call me a sociopath if you want, right? I don't particularly value intrinsically, the life of, like, for example, a puppy more than I value the life of, like, a cow, right? You're not gonna really get me with that, like, that hypothetical.
Yeah. So
What it comes
Oh,
down to
sorry.
for
Sorry,
me
continue.
is the only thing that I think I could ever care about, rationally speaking, is my own experience. I think that's the only thing that I could remain consistent on, because I can't prove even that this puppy is having an experience. Right, the best that I could make is an argument from, like, an emergent property. Right, we could say that having the certain brain structure that we have as a human being, it makes the emergent property of conscious experience. Right, I could say that is a thing. And then I could also follow up with animals sometimes have, like, a somewhat similar brain structure, therefore they'd have a conscious experience. But even then, how would you convince me to care about that? Why would I care about that?
So I mean, I think most people don't care about others because of the social contract. Almost all people care about others because they don't want to be harmed, and they can recognize that means that others don't want to be harmed, and that applies to animals as well. When I'm hurt, I do the same physiological things that almost all animals do. So it's like
Right.
most people wouldn't want to hurt an
Can I
animal,
ask you a
and I
hypothetical
will.
question? I understand
Yeah,
exactly
go
where
ahead.
you're going for this. Okay, so let's say hypothetically you're on your deathbed, all right? You're about to die. And you have a button right next to you. And if you press that button, it'll prolong your life for an extra, like, let's say, it'll prolong your life for an extra, like, 15 minutes. But conversely, after you prolong your life for 50, or, like, everybody else will die, like, immediately after you do, right? Would you press that button?
No.
Right. I think that's, like, the fundamental disagreement we're gonna run into. So the thing is, I don't have a problem with the vegan position. I think the vegan position is actually a very consistent one. I think it's more consistent than most meat eaters' position. Um, I think that the problem is this is what we run into with this debate. The problem we run into is that you kind of have to appeal to the idea that somebody else has some kind of emotional connection, which they might not actually have. And then
I don't.
once you reach this
Sorry.
point, once you reach this point in the debate, right? How do you convince somebody to care about something if they don't intuitively? That's, like, my question that I have.
So the issue that I'm having is that um,
Right.
almost every single person that I could speak to about this on the planet wouldn't have thought about this enough to the point where they can use this like this I think I've watched a couple of your videos as well, and you were talking in one of them about how to even discuss philosophy we're in a very privileged position.
Mhm.
So I mean I would appeal to that. No one,
Yeah.
the
Oh
vast
no.
majority of the
Certainly.
people on
Yeah.
the planet don't know what egoism is.
Oh yeah. No.
um
Definitely. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. But I don't think that has, like, much relevancy to the argument. So if you, what you were to say is, I think that anybody who values the experience of an animal ought to be vegan. I'd say that is a good stance, right? That is a fine stance. I don't have a problem with that stance. I want to make the assertion, though, that anyone who cares about animals' experiences intrinsically ought to be vegan. What you're leaving there is an if condition, right? So it's if you care about the suffering of animals, you ought to be vegan. What that leaves it open to, and this is, like, the problem that I run into with a lot of vegans, right? Is I'll say, okay, well, I don't care about the experience of animals. Should I still be vegan? And the answer is almost always yes. Yes, you should still be vegan. So that makes it sound to me like that's not actually the argument. So I'm trying to get down to, like, the fundamental argument of it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not boiling down to a fundamental argument because I understand that an argument from egoism is, I would say it's the only argument that a vegan doesn't have anything to say against. However,
Mm-hmm.
like I said
Right.
before, I would just reject it. I just don't think it's true. There is no way you would walk past that puppy, and I
Right.
will fucking die on that. There is
Okay.
no way you will.
Okay. Okay. You know, let's not even talk about me. How about we don't even talk about me? Like, I'm gonna remove myself from this scenario. Do you deny the idea that some people don't care about animals?
Um, no, no, yeah, I think there are people that don't care about animals.
Right. So would you say that everybody ought to be vegan then?
Um, yeah,
Because what
I
you've
would I would
done,
say
what
everybody
we've
should be
gotten
vegan and
to
stuff.
is we now have considered a scenario which doesn't, like, fit your argument.
No, no, I think it does fit my argument. Sorry, it
How
just took
does
me
it
a
fit
while
your
to figure it
argument?
out.
All right. All right.
So I
Explain to
would
me the
say
argument then.
everyone ought to be vegan because being vegan reduces the suffering of sentient beings. But you're going to say that those people don't care about the suffering of those sentient beings.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think there are definitely people who don't care about other people. They don't care about different groups of people, and you would be able to argue
Right, right. So
in the way that you have done.
how I'd argue that, right, and this is where I'm going back to like the most racist person on earth would be able to be convinced through an argument like this, right? Um, let's say that someone's saying I don't like black people, right? I hate black people, okay? I would say, okay, that's fine. You can hate black people. I can't convince you to intrinsically care about black people. But what I can say is having black people within a system overall benefits the economy. It grows a society. Whenever we have less civil unrest, we typically see grows in the socioeconomic status of everybody, the improvement of everybody's living conditions. So therefore, if you want to live your optimal experience, you ought to care for black people. That's how I'd argue that. The problem is, and this is what I run into with the vegan argument, the problem is that you would never get that from an animal, right? So you have to show me how would cooperating with an animal help my preferences?
No, sorry if you just let me finish this point. My
Sure, go
problem
for
is
it.
that
Yeah,
you could use that argument with the most racist person in the world, and
sure.
that racist person could come back with a counter argument, and eventually you could argue for hours, and the person could still not care about black people. But
Sure.
you would still be in the position where you say, I mean, I would still be in the position where I say you ought not to hurt black people because they can suffer in the same ways that we can. So regardless of whether or not someone cares about people or animals, it's we know that they suffer, so we should seek to reduce that suffering.
Sure.
Or
So my problem with this position, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, and you might have to explain it over to me again because that was I might just be having a disconnect here. Um, I think 100% they could not care about black people, but the difference between these two arguments would be I would have given a rational reason why they ought to care about black people. I would have given them the reasoning behind a normative choice to care about black people.
yeah, and I
The
think I've
difference
given I've
is
given one as well.
no,
Animals are sentient and they suffer.
okay, but why should I care about the sentience of other people? Again, I'm arguing from the axiom, and I think this is a fundamental axiom that everybody cares about. Everyone cares to maximize their preferences. This is an X equals X scenario, right? Your preferences are your preferences. Like, would I don't think you disagree with that, right?
So I mean, can you sorry, can I just have a second to think?
Sure, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Is there a person who doesn't care about maximizing their preferences?
No.
I mean, would you say that their preference is that they don't want to maximize the preferences in that
Yes.
case?
But
Yeah.
but then that would be their preferences. So again, like this is like saying, do you think there's a person who wants to not want something, or like they want to not want like that's an impossible scenario that contradicts itself.
So what if a person's preferences were for the economy to crumble and for themselves and everyone else to
If
be in a
that's
state
your
of ruin?
preference, then sure. I
So
mean, but
how
I don't
would
think
you convince them to care about black people?
how would I convince them to care about black people? Well, I would say that in ideal scenarios, right, their preferences would never be able to be enacted by just like stumbling over black people. The difference is we wouldn't have the economy collapsing. What you just have is a weaker economy. If you want to say their goal is to weaken the economy, I'd ask, okay, why is that? Why is that your preference? How does this maximize your preference? And then I think we have to get into a much deeper discussion about philosophy that I don't think I can have without the person who actually believes that, right?
Um, I kind of get that, but I don't know if that doesn't convince me. So let's not say the black people then. What if
Sure.
someone didn't care about any other people, and said, oh, every other person, and myself included, should be in a state of suffering, and that was their preference.
That was their
How
preference. Okay,
how
then
would you say how would
I
you convince
wouldn't.
them
I
they
would
should
say
care
that
for?
even trying to enact that would probably get you either imprisoned or killed. So that's probably not the best idea. The difference is egoism. This is like a
But
large.
they don't. That's their preference, though.
Yeah, this is a preference, right? But I think that one of their preferences would probably be to not be dead if they want to see people suffer. I just think this is a preference that would never be able to be enacted. That would be how I'd argue against that. I don't think it's a practical preference to ever enact.
Right. Okay. I mean, yeah, we've strayed a little bit from veganism, but I mean, yeah, so there's not
Sure.
much. I don't. Maybe there is, but I don't feel like there's much more that I can talk to another person about if you're just going to outright deny the fact that we should care about animals suffering, because like I said, I
No,
don't
okay. So,
think.
so can I can I give you can I give you the way that you probably would argue against this if I was to make your argument for you here?
Um, can I just say one more thing and then
Sure. Yeah. Go
sure.
for it. Go for it, buddy. Yeah. Stage is all
In,
yours.
for me, I've heard this argument before, and
Sure.
it strikes me as um you realize it's the only way that you can remain consistent against veganism. And there's no way that anyone can say that you definitely care about that puppy. But I think I mean, if you definitely would walk past that puppy in the puddle and leave it to die, then you are being completely consistent, and only you can know that you wouldn't do that. But anyone else that's listening, or anyone else that we were talked to about this, would save that puppy. So
I
you
don't.
are in an
I disagree with that.
incredibly
See,
small
this
minority. You are
this
in,
is why I disagree with that. Okay, so I think there are, again, I think you've already admitted that there are people who don't care about the suffering of animals, right? So there is somebody who would walk past that puppy. So therefore, there is somebody who can remain consistent.
incredibly few and far between.
Right, but then that would contradict your original statement of everybody should be vegan, and it would be most people should be vegan, right?
So the reason my statement is everybody should be vegan.
Sure.
I wouldn't say everybody should be vegan because they care about animals and therefore shouldn't suffer them. I would say shouldn't cause suffering.
Right.
I would say everyone should be vegan because animals suffer and therefore no one should cause the suffering of animals.
Right. Sorry, I just read a fucking chat message from fucking Scrimsocks. But yeah, I think like whenever we reach this point in the argument, right, it's literally just claiming somebody else is being dishonest, which is like I don't really like to do that, right? I guess it's a very weird weird stance. I get that it's pretty unintuitive to a lot of people. This is why I typically hold the stance that I think most people should probably be vegan. That's probably my statement. I think that a lot of people, if they want to be consistent, should probably be a vegan. But I do think there are exceptions to that rule, and I think that therefore claiming that everybody should be vegan is probably not the best statement.
Right, okay.
I don't think I'd ever see, like, here's the thing, the way that I'd argue it, right, if I was in your stance, is I'd say something like, stopping, like, the killing of animals could, like, be beneficial for the environment, or something like that. And then obviously, I'm not very convinced by that argument. I'd have a different argument that we could go down from there. I think about these things pretty extensively. It's kind of like a side job for me. So I could go down, we can go down that road, right? I'd say, well, I guess it isn't really essentialized to killing animals. That'd be like more so about the industry, right? Then we'd have an argument about whether that's a good or bad thing, and like you'd go down that road. And the other thing I'd say is maybe like, you could say society would become more efficient if less people were distressed by the killing of animals. Like that might be an argument, and then I think you could go down there. I think that there might be actually a very convincing argument, like to the egoist stance that is against, or that is for being vegan, right? I think that is definitely a thing that might actually come up in the future, right? I just think I've yet to hear that argument. I think that's my problem. And I'm like, okay, I think I don't discuss with that many vegans. I actually, normally when I'm arguing the veganism stance, I'm actually arguing that somebody should probably be pro-vegan. I'll run into these people who will be like, oh, I care about the suffering of animals, but I'm still gonna eat meat. I'm like, that doesn't make very much sense now, does it? And then I'll have that argument. I just don't talk with that many vegans, so I think that's why probably someone wanted us to discuss things, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't like to discuss the environmental effects of veganism because veganism is a solely moral issue for me.
Right. No, I mean, that makes sense, yeah. But whenever we argue...
You are right that it's a strong argument from the egoist perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a strong argument that you should care about animals because you should care about animals. Yeah, I think I think it's an actually like argumentation route that you could probably go down, and like maybe like eventually we'll hit like a point where like we could have like a discussion, like a discourse around that. I think that'd actually be very beneficial if we were to argue that.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'm assuming that you would say that you shouldn't stop eating meat because of the environmental effects, because you yourself wouldn't have that much of an impact. Is that right?
So
like it would have
the
to be
argument that I'd
it.
have is that maybe like if everybody stopped doing that, I think that maybe we'd like delay the death of the planet. But then this lays back to like the question of like, oh yeah, would you press the button to like kill everybody? Right? I don't think that it's ever going to have an effect within my lifetime. I don't think that would ever be a thing. So therefore, I don't really care too much about it. I don't think we have a moral imperative to preserve the planet for like further generations. I just don't think it's a thing. I don't think you can it's actually a very complex philosophical issue. It takes a lot of thinking. A lot of philosophy is very confusing if you actually look into it. I don't think you can have like a moral obligation to something that does not yet exist. I don't think that's a thing.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
So I think that'd be probably the way I'd argue against that. And then I think you could also argue against it is in like, it's not actually, you're not essentializing it to the killing of animals. What you're talking about is the environmental effects, right? So it's an essentialized action. It's an essentialized consequence, right? So you'd say there would still be conditions where we could eat animals, and then I'd say it's less of a veganism issue. It's more of a, oh, well, it's the environment, like something we care about issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, correct. And yeah, and I mean that's why I don't like discussing the environmental effects, because I see a world where if oftentimes the environmental argument is the one that wins people over, but I see a world where, say for example, 50% of the population goes vegan because of the environment, and then
Mhm.
someone comes out with a new way to kill animals that doesn't harm the environment, then all those people stop
Yeah,
being
then
vegan.
they'll
Yeah,
immediately turn back. So I guess like
that's where I'm at.
probably more persistent argument would be the moral one. Yeah, I think that again, I go back on the stance like, yeah, I think most people should be vegan. It's just like these are not like axioms that I have, and I don't think I could convince myself to hold the axiom. I think there are 100%
Yeah,
people who do, though. So I don't think it's like a strong thing to say like everybody
yeah,
should be vegan. That's probably where I disagree with it. Yeah.
yeah. Like yeah, like I said, I mean, I think there's not much else we can discuss, unfortunately. I mean, unless you want to discuss anything else, but
I
I would
think
just
I think we kind of hit a philosophical junction here. I mean, a lot of the times whenever we're discussing philosophy, right, you'll hit a point where your axioms just like completely disagree. Like the foundation of what you believe is in a disagreement, right? This happens a lot with like the atheist theist arguments, right? You'll hit like a foundation where like, okay, well, this is my epistemological framework or epistemic framework. Sorry, that's the wrong conjugation for that. What the fuck? But this is like the foundation of my epistemic framework, and then they say, oh, well, I disagree with that, and then like there's nowhere you can go from there. I think that happens quite a lot. Especially with the vegan argument. Yeah, but I mean, it was fun having you on to discuss things. If you want to like ever come back on the show, it was a pleasure having you.
yeah, yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'd like to do that. Am I okay to just like I don't know if it'd be a final statement or something, but just say
Yeah,
my
you can make a
piece.
final statement. Yeah, 100% go for it, my guy.
Oh, and I actually wanted to ask you something as well, that
Sure.
just
Yeah.
some clarification on some philosophy. But yeah, I'll make a final statement on
Sure.
veganism. But so yeah, I guess the crux of this argument to me is it sort of revolves around that. If I've asked you that question about a drowning puppet and you want to
Sure.
bite the bullet and say you'll leave it to die, then
Right.
there's nothing I can say. Only you will ever know if that was true.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, a lot of the times, the times when vegans are talking, I'm not really trying to convince you. I'm trying to
Right.
convince anyone who's listening.
No, I'm 100% down for you to convince everybody. In
Yeah,
fact, I'll even help you convince some people who are listening. I think I value at like the most. The thing I value the most is less than agreeing with people. I like when stances are consistent. I think that's probably the thing I value the most whenever we're having these discussions. Yeah.
yeah. And I would just say that I mean I'm kind of appealing to that thing where discussing
Hmm.
philosophy is a bit of a privilege.
Hmm.
When you are in a supermarket and you are stood in front of like the meat section, and you can either buy the sliced chicken or the sage and onion slices,
Hmm.
there is a victim involved in that, and
Right.
we can
Right.
discuss whether or not we should care about that victim. But I mean at the end of the day, we all know that someone
Yeah.
died for one of them and someone didn't for the other.
Right. I mean, I think an actually pretty strong argument. I don't even know if you could get people to appeal to this, but I know like one of my philosophy friends from like the Kingdom of Debates crowd, if you know where that is. Like Jacob. I think they have this position where they like almost completely reject normative ethics, where they just go straight up and say, I think people should just go off of their intuition. I don't think that's a really good truth tracker, but they seem to think that is. So I mean, maybe I think that's like the normal thing that a lot of people go off of. So I think that's probably where you could argue veganism from as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't like to do that in a philosophical way. It sounds pretty scary. There's some
No,
pretty horrible intuitions about out
oh
there.
yeah, no, they have. I'm like this leads to some crazy conclusion. I mean, they're very consistent on it, and they're like way smarter than I am. Like this person, like as much as I know about the philosophy, they blow me out of the water because like holy shit, dude. There are some people on the internet who just only do philosophy, and it's very scary. This is why I'm scared of people who don't have any social media platforms. Okay, there are people like Jacob too out there. Like he seems to have very like consistent philosophical stances. It's just like they're unintuitive to me, you could say.
Yeah,
But I think there's definitely room to have a discussion, especially with like a lot of people. I think a lot of people probably should be vegan. Like again, I think that's probably a good philosophical stance. I think the vegan stance is actually probably stronger than a vast majority of media stances. I think it's more consistent. Yeah.
yeah, okay. The question I wanted to ask you was,
Sure.
however many fucking times I Google and read and reread the definition of begging the question, I can't fucking understand it at all. So
Right. So
can you help me with
begging
that?
the question, the phrase begging the question is actually a mistranslation. It makes it really hard to understand. Begging the question is actually meant to be interpreted from, I believe it's original Greek or Roman. It's supposed to be claiming the question. And that is where you try and claim the question you're trying to answer in one of your premises. So whenever we construct an argument, Like, I believe you already have it on, like, your TikTok page. You have, like, my basic stance, right? It was, like, the first video that came up whenever
Yeah.
somebody sent me your channel or your TikTok page, right? And it goes premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, etc., conclusion, right? So, like, my argument would be, like, from this discussion, premise 1, I have an experience. Premise 2, I ought to maximize that experience. Premise 3, cooperating with an animal will never maximize my experience. Conclusion would be, I ought not compromise with animals if it doesn't maximize my experience, or I ought not, value the animals, right? That would be the conclusion to my premises. So what happens is whenever you try and claim the answer to that question in one of your premises, like, for example, let me give you an abortion argument that would be like begging the question. So if I say abortion is wrong, right? That's the conclusion I'm trying to raise. And I say abortion is murder, murder is wrong, therefore abortion is wrong, right? I've already claimed the question in the very first premise. And that is to say, I claim that abortion was murder, which is by definition an unjust killing, which is what we're trying to answer. We're trying to answer, is it a just killing? Right? So you're claiming the question within one of your premises, which is why it's a really hard fallacy to understand. It's like a form of circular reasoning, you could call it. Yeah. Another example would be, what was it? I think it's the Da Vinci Code is, okay, let's say, like, my argument's gonna be, the Da Vinci Code is true. Why is it true? It's because in the book it says it's true. And then because it says it's true, that justifies the book being true. And in the book it says it's true. Right? It's just like a form of circular reasoning.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I think I understand. I don't know. Every time I read it, I think I understand it. But yeah, that made it a bit
It's
clearer.
very hard. It's very hard, and it's very, very hard to like call it out like in a debate. It's very, especially if you don't like do philosophy on the internet.
I think that's the issue that I have. I think I do understand it, and then I think people just say it in debates, and I'm like, oh, maybe I don't fucking understand it because that doesn't make sense how I thought I understood it. But yeah, I think
Yeah, I mean, all right. It was a massive pleasure having you on the channel. It was great.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot. It was good speaking to you.
Yeah. All right. It was a great discussion. All right. See you around, my dude.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. That was fun. What's up, gamers?
Oh, what's up?
Okay, I'm gonna be totally real right now. That conversation was literal. I just need to fucking fire off a couple things.
I'm gonna be honest, Bunk. I wasn't really here. I was getting a drink.
Well, I was.
Understandable.
So I am gonna be legitimately serious with you here. Watching that conversation was such a fucking roll. Okay, you rolled this guy so fucking hard. The problem is, this is the problem. I haven't talked to you for very long. We've only known each other for a few months.
Sure.
I wholly do not believe that you actually hold this stance.
I do. Unfortunately,
I don't think any person
if you have
in
ever
the world holds this stance at all. Except
I
little
highly
fucking
disagree.
sociopaths.
I'm just incredibly autistic, my guy. No, I think 100% people hold this stance. So, like, you could say, oh, I don't think you hold the stance. I'm like, okay, fine. We could say I don't hold the stance. Do you think somebody holds the stance, though?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but
yeah, exactly.
The
There we go.
is-
there we go. There we go.
problem is-
There we go. The
okay, I
argument's
just need to say
over.
one more thing. Here's one thing though.
Sure.
It's that I know it's not an argument because, like I said, I can never know what you're really thinking. It's
Sure.
just that the reason I say this is a role is because you walked into this conversation, you knew exactly what you were going to say, and I think you knew that this guy was going to have no response because what is he supposed to say?
I mean,
that's
no,
not what you
actually, before this conversation, I brainstormed up some responses that he could have had. Like, I was thinking, like, I was playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag on my Switch in my bed, right? And I'm just thinking about, okay, what could possibly come up in this conversation and how I'm going to respond to it.
That's the thing, like, especially with, like, school projects, you're supposed to come up with arguments that the other side would make and, like, argue with them.
Oh, yeah, no,
in your,
this is how I rationalize all my
That's what you're
positions.
supposed
I
to.
come up with arguments against them, and then I argue with myself in my head, and then whichever one
Exactly.
wins, that's what I go with.
That's what you're supposed to do. But no one does this.
I mean, I think it was a really fun discussion, actually. I argue with people a lot. Like, I've held this stance for fucking ages. If you actually, like, go back on my old stuff, like, people I've known that I've held this stance. Like, it's just, like, it seems unintuitive to other people, but it's very intuitive to me.